Brandon Cronenberg is back with his third feature film called Infinity Pool. He released his first major film, it was his second overall, but first major film in 2020 called Possessor, which was a flawed film, but mostly solid job, and it actually got me really excited about his future. I mean, I'm a big fan of his father's, and watching Possessor, I saw the talent there, and I was excited to see what he would do next. And so here he goes bigger with high profile cast and a more ambitious story. What's interesting is with Possessor, and I guess this isn't too big of a surprise, but it was sort of very quietly put out there. And I had heard of the movie before I had heard about Brandon directing it. And it was a small story with a great attention to detail. That was I thought, its biggest strength. Infinity Pool, on the other hand, has been all over the place. I mean, that has been gathering a ton of attention lately. So the question is it worth it? Infinity Pool is about an American writer named James, played by Alexander Skarsgård, who's on vacation with his wife on this fictional island of Latolka. While inside this resort community, they meet Gabby, played by the amazing Mia Goth, and her husband, and decide to leave the compound and have a day trip on the beach. After a day in the sun on the way home, James accidentally hits and kills a local resident with his car. They decide not to call the police and instead flee the scene because it's known that the island is very poor and the government is very corrupt. Okay, so far this is the plot of I Know What You Did Last Summer, but thankfully it veers off in another direction pretty quickly as almost immediately James gets picked up by the local police and sentenced to death. However, as a way out, he decides to take part in a local custom where an exact double of himself is made and then killed, satisfying the sentence and allowing him to go free. What ensues after that is a down the rabbit hole journey for James as he gets drawn into this hedonistic underworld of these rich aristocrats that vacation on the island every year, led by Mia Goth's Gabby. First off, I'm going to get this out of the way immediately and this may seem weird, but I'm going to put aside the idea that this very poor small island country has the ability to make an exact duplicate of someone right down to their memories. It's a crazy thing to kind of just put aside because in any other movie this would be a huge caveat, but that actually ends up being a smaller part of the story than I would have expected given the world it's built. But let's do that. Now, the one word that kept popping into my head while I was watching this was perversion. Much like his father, there is a perverseness here to this film in how it's told, in how it's shot, and how it's acted. And that's not a bad thing. But you can clearly see how Cronenberg relishes these very specific images and moments in an almost voyeuristic way. However, my bigger issue with the film is that it felt very surface level to me. Now, his father, David, also had this deep level of perversion to his movies, but I don't know, it always felt like there was a more fully fleshed out narrative involved. With Infinity Pool, I had a really hard time kind of connecting with it on a deeper level. I could never quite identify what this movie was trying to say to me. The attention to detail was definitely here, as it was in his last film, Possessor, but I got the distinct feeling of something a mile wide but an inch deep. Quick aside story. When I was back in high school, I used to write these short horror stories. No big deal. But I remember one day in class, there was this girl that was sitting next to me, and she had asked me to read one of the stories. And at that moment, the person sitting in front of her, Glenn was his name actually, turned around and he said he also wrote horror stories. And then he began describing these stories to me, one in particular about a guy who had stabbed somebody and then was licking the blood off the knife. So even back then, as naive as I was, I could clearly tell that Glenn was overcompensating in order to try and get this girl's attention because she had expressed an interest in these horror stories. He was trying to be shocking. That was his goal. I found myself thinking of Glenn while watching this movie. There was some shocking images here, no doubt, but also nothing I haven't seen before. So I kept kind of waiting for something else to sort of hit me, but it just never really came. Now, I'm sure there are people who write a 26-page blog post on the multitude of levels that this movie works on or touches on, But maybe I'm just not clever enough. Or, I mean, I probably for certain am not clever enough. But I just didn't see it. I mean, is he talking about the freedoms of the rich to take advantage of the poor and live above society? Well, James was just a poor writer who married rich. Is he talking about corrupt governments? Sure, probably. But why the whole double aspect? Why include that in the movie? Is he talking about rich society trying to indoctrinate James in this sort of eyes wide shut world? Maybe. But why? Like, what drew them to him? They do tease the idea of the double aspect and its moral, ethical, and even existential repercussions of making a double yourself and then killing it. And then, of course, the idea of who's real and who is the double. But they kind of bring it up once and then just sort of drop it and move on to whatever the next sort of visual sequence is. One thing is for certain, though, both Alexander Skarsgård and Mia Goth commit 100% to their roles. They are in it. And that's always great to see. Like, when actors strip away any sense of vanity and just really dig into a movie like this, it is impressive for sure. Also, the movie looks fantastic. Like, there is a clear talent behind the camera. And once again, I am very impressed with what Brandon is doing, and I am interested to see what he does going forward. But I couldn't help but walk away from this movie feeling a bit underwhelmed. I'll give it a B-, but let me know what you think.